If you blinked during the Conjuring film, you may have missed something. The characters, Ed and Lorraine Warren, trace reports of demonic activity at the Perrin farm back to a 19th century woman allegedly descended from Mary Towne Easty. This woman, they claim, sacrificed her baby to the devil and cursed the land.
Mary Towne Easty was a real person who was executed in 1692 after being accused of diabolical witchcraft in real court. And the woman named Bathsheba Sherman in The Conjuring was also a real person. But she didn't sacrifice her baby to Satan, and she didn't curse the land. This is the real history, the actual history, and the real history, the film real history. We explained it all in this week's episode of The Thing About Witch Hunts. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Josh and I are direct descendants of Mary Esty. The film strongly implies that Mary Esty was really a satanic witch whose descendant sacrificed a child. The real Mary Esty, of course, did none of these things. We're going to reveal what she was really accused of doing.
And we'll be sharing the claims made about Mary Esty in her 1692 witch trials and the claims made about her in the 2013 story created by the Hollywood filmmakers behind The Conjuring.
The Conjuring and its sequels and spin-offs are entertaining horror films. In fact, the Conjuring Universe is financially the most successful horror franchise of all time.
Just get how much money they've made. The 9 films in the series have together earned over $2.8 billion. That's roughly equal to the gross domestic product of the Gambia, an African nation of 2.5 million people. I've watched The Conjuring several times, and I love it. Director James Wan definitely knows how to do horror right.
There is something genuinely compelling about the idea of places that hold evil and curses that outlive the witches who cast them. Human beings have been telling stories like this for thousands of years.
We've got some great episodes in our back catalog about witches and monsters in popular culture. And now here's a fresh one, which is coming up because the Warrens' Annabelle doll, the famous or infamous doll, it's coming to Salem, and not everyone is so thrilled about it.
Ed and Lorraine Warren and the Warrenverse, well, as you may know, there's a whole universe of films based on the stories told by Ed and Lorraine Warren. The real couple claimed to investigate thousands of demon possessions, inspired a number of compelling tales.
The Conjuring, the 2013 film, was the first in the series, and it was well received. It scored very well on Rotten Tomatoes. It is certified fresh. It's got a tomato meter at 86% and a popcorn meter at 83%. So both the critics and the public love it. The box office, it got $320 million against a budget of just $20 million.
Subsequent films fall into 3 categories. There are 4 mainline Conjuring movies, 3 Annabelle movies, 2 Nun movies. Other films in the Warren universe include the Amityville Horror and its sequels, The Haunting in Connecticut, The Curse of La Llorona.
Demons in popular culture are commonly represented as culprits for the things we cannot explain. The dread that we feel that comes from nowhere, the sense that something is wrong in a place or space.
We're going to introduce you to the real people depicted as demonic in The Conjuring because they deserve to be known for who they actually were. The Conjuring movie attached that very powerful tradition unnecessarily to real people and cast them in the most evil roles. Doing this metaphorically reconvicted our ancestor Mary Towne Easty.
Mary Esty was executed in Salem in 1692, and The Conjuring names her as the origin of a satanic lineage, which she was not. In 1692, she said that she was innocent in a legal document, a petition she wrote to the governor and the court. In 1711, the province of Massachusetts Bay cleared her name with legislation.
The central villain in The Conjuring is a baby-killing satanic woman, Bathsheba Sherman, the supposed descendant of Mary Esty. In the movie, she's committed this diabolical murder and cursed the land. The story centers around this curse, tormenting the newest family to occupy that farmhouse and the cursed land. And this kicks off the whole franchise.
It's a really good story. And it's not impossible that the real Bathsheba is a descendant of Mary Esty. But according to the genealogy site WikiTree, a large portion of her lineage has been mapped out with no link found yet. Further ancestry research will reveal if there is a connection. Who was Bathsheba Sherman in real life? She was seemingly a completely ordinary woman who died of a stroke in 1885 at the age of 73 and has had her grave vandalized repeatedly since this movie came out.
As descendants, how do we approach the fictional demon story? I do love horror. I love demon lore.
It makes for great stories. They're very scary, bone chilling stories.
We love the way popular culture uses monsters and possession and dark forces to talk about the things that actually scare humanity: fear of losing our minds, fear of losing our children, fear that the house we live in might not be safe.
These are ancient fears, and demons are one of the oldest ways human beings have given them shape. They appear in some of the earliest writings. And The Conjuring works because those fears are real. People genuinely feel them, and the film makes you experience those in real time as you watch it.
I'd love to take the time to talk about those jump scare moments, but we've got to stay on the history. It also genuinely makes me ask, do real human beings deserve to have their names attached to a demonic narrative without their consent? Mary wasn't asked. In the US, it is perfectly legal to do this to real people who are dead. So, because Mary Esty is dead and cannot say she is innocent some more, they can do this to her. This film fabricates historical tales with authority, as it provides a believable monster.
It's a familiar fiction formula. The idea of a malevolent force bound to a place, a curse that passes through generations, and a mother possessed against her will is powerful storytelling that belongs to the age old tradition of demon lore. So, for anyone who has not seen The Conjuring, let's set the scene. It's 1971, and a family called the Perrons, Roger and Carolyn, and their 5 daughters, they move into a farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Things start to go wrong almost immediately. The parents were an actual family, and they really did seek the help of the Warrens in actuality.
And they call in the Warrens, who are the known paranormal investigators. I mean, can you name anybody else from that era who was doing this? I can't. Ed and Lorraine were real people. Ed died in 2006, Lorraine just in 2019. They were Connecticut based, and they made a career out of investigating and testifying to what they called demonic hauntings.
In the opening credits of The Conjuring, the Warrens are credited with investigating thousands of cases, and the film is presented as based on the true story. And the Perron family was real. They did call in the Warrens. So there is a real foundation in those elements of the story.
There's a real foundation, but what the film builds on that foundation is a different matter.
The Perron family begins to experience terrifying incidents. The Warrens investigate and determine that the farmhouse is haunted by the spirit of a woman named Bathsheba Sherman, who the film tells us was a Satanist who lived there in the 1800s, sacrificed her newborn baby to the devil, cursed the land, and then hanged herself from a tree on the property.
And then here's the part that matters most to us. The film tells us that Bathsheba Sherman was a descendant of Mary Towne Easty. Mary was executed in the Salem witch trials in 1692. The implication being that the witchcraft ran in the family line, that Bathsheba inherited it from Mary Esty. Heredity witchcraft is a timeless and very damaging motif.
So Mary Esty becomes the origin point, the matriarch of the whole demonic lineage that kicks off the entire Conjuring, Nun, and Annabelle franchise.
And here's what makes this particularly damaging: the film does not present this as a guess, a legend, or a theory, or even a supernatural vision. It presents it as the result of Lorraine's research. Lorraine's character sits down and investigates the history of the property and uncovers the Bathsheba story. She finds it, she documents it. The film frames the Mary Esty connection as a historical fact that the Warrens discovered.
And this lends the idea a certain amount of authority. It's not a ghost saying something, it is a researcher finding something. The film is saying, we looked into this, and this is what the record actually shows.
And the true record shows nothing of the kind. There is no historical source, no genealogical record, no local folklore, nothing predating the 2013 film that connects Mary Towne Easty to Bathsheba Sherman in any way. The screenwriters invented it, but the film wraps that invention in the language and visual grammar of a historical research. Documents, records, investigation.
So when an audience watches that scene, they are not watching a horror movie invent a backstory. They're watching a paranormal investigator uncover a historical truth. That is a completely different thing in terms of how it lands and how persistent it is.
It is the difference between a film creating a monster and a film presenting a bad event as what actually happened. And The Conjuring is doing the second thing with our ancestors' name, life, and reputation.
And the actual Lorraine Warren, who served as a consultant on the film, let her screen counterpart portray an invented satanic genealogical connection.
The real Lorraine Warren did not discover the Mary Esty satanic connection because there is no Mary Esty satanic connection to discover. The screenwriters added it, but the film presents the Lorraine character finding it. That is the fiction layered on top of fiction.
The film's central image, Bathsheba hanging from a tree on the property, is also a distortion of real people. Yeah, Burrowville.
The historical record shows that a woman named Susan Richard Arnold did hang herself in Burrowville. She appears in the Black Book of Burrowville and is confirmed by a newspaper obituary from the Pascoag Herald in 1866. Arnold was 50 years old, and she died in her own home, not on the Perrin property.
Bathsheba never actually lived on the Arnold estate where the parents bought their home. But the film took a real tragedy, relocated it, reassigned it to Bathsheba Sherman, and said she was descended from Mary Towne Easty, who also died quite tragically.
Can I even follow that line? That's fun. So 3 real women, none of them connected to each other or the devil in real life. All of them pulled into the same demonizing narrative.
There's another element of the film that's worth mentioning, which is the music box. The youngest parent daughter finds this antique music box at the base of the big tree on the property and starts using it to communicate with the child spirit named Rory, who the film tells us was one of Bathsheba's victims.
Of course, that tree was the hanging tree. And the music box becomes a kind of window into the past. Lorraine sees a vision through it. It is a beautifully constructed horror device and scene, but in reality, there is no music box, and this is just invented for the film.
But it's doing real thematic work because the whole film is about mothers and children. Bathsheba kills her baby. She possesses Carolyn Perrin, the mother, to try and make her kill her children. And Rory is a child killed by his mother, who was also possessed by Bathsheba. The music box is found by the youngest child. Everything circles back to that same fear around children.
Genuinely effective horror. And it makes it harder to untangle because the emotional logic is so strong. But the historical people underneath that emotional logic deserve to be seen clearly.
Another thing in the film The demonic Bathsheba kills the family dog on the first night. The dog is named Sadie.
There were real dogs behind Sadie. So the film folded two real dog deaths, one of Schultz and Sheba, into one, changed the name and attributed it to the demonic activity rather than a car or an accident on a suburban street. Notably, one real dog's name was Bathsheba before anyone had ever heard of Bathsheba Sherman, which is obviously one of the eerie details the film could not have invented. Oh, let's tell them the Salem dog stories while we're on the dog theme.
Yeah, there's a story about the minister's dog eating a witch cake. John Proctor's sister wrote a dog. We talked about this just the other day. And sadly, dogs were killed for being instruments of witchcraft. That's all in the record. That last bit comes to us from Robert Califf, and he's a trusted source on the Salem witch trials. So let's talk more about Mary Towne Easty, because she is the one the film names as the origin of all of this. And she deserves to be known for who she actually was.
Mary Towne Easty was born in 1634 in Great Yarmouth, England. Her parents were William Towne and Joanna Blessing Towne. The family made the journey to New England in 1635, settling in Salem. In 1652, they relocated to a farm in nearby Topsfield.
There in Topsfield, Mary met and married Isaac Esty in 1655, and the couple had 11 children together.
By 1692, Mary was a grandmother. She had spent nearly 40 years in that community and was a full member of the Topsfield Church. She was known, she was respected, she was pious, she was loved.
And her sisters, Rebecca Nurse and Sarah Cloyce, were also accused in the Salem witch trials, the Towne sisters. All three of them caught up in the same prosecutions. Rebecca Nurse is probably the more well-known name today, but all three of them faced this.
So, an arrest warrant was issued for Mary on April 21st, 1692. She was accused of sundry acts of witchcraft against the bodies of Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott. Of these three afflicted persons, Mercy Lewis would prove to be the biggest thorn in Mary Esty's side.
Mary was arrested the next day, April 22nd, 1692, and what the record shows about her examination that same day is important to understand because it shows you exactly what kind of evidence was being used against her.
When she clasped her hands during the court examination, one of the accusers imitated the gesture and claimed she could not release her own hands until Mary released her hands.
And when Mary tilted her head, the girls accused her of trying to break their necks. Her posture was evidence against her.
And Mary stood in the face of it with remarkable composure. The magistrate, John Hathorne, who was not known for sympathy toward the accused, actually showed a flicker of doubt. He asked the afflicted girls whether they were quite sure Mary Esty was the one tormenting them.
And that almost never happened.
It almost never happened, and because of it, Mary was actually released from prison on May 18th, 1692. After imprisonment, she went home.
She went home.
She went home. And then 2 days later, on May 20th, one of the accusers, Mercy Lewis, claimed that Mary's specter was afflicting her again. A second warrant was issued that night. She was taken from her son's cellar in an emergency, returned to prison.
Mercy Lewis was so sick on May 20th that the people who were attending her were certain she would die. Jonathan Putnam, James Darling, who was Mercy's uncle by marriage, Benjamin Hutchinson, who's my distant uncle, and Samuel Braybrook were all present when Mercy was sick.
They said Mercy was unable to speak. This sounds like fictional horror. So Elizabeth Hubbard was brought to discover what she could see did afflict Mercy. When Elizabeth arrived, she and Mercy alternated having fits. So they brought in another afflicted girl.
And what did she do? She got afflicted too. So the two of them both complained much of Mary Esty, who brought the book to said Mercy several times, as the men heard her say in her trances, and vexed and tortured them both by choking and seemingly breathless fits and other fits, threatening said Mercy with a winding sheet, which was a burial shroud, and afterwards with a coffin if said Mercy would not sign to her book, with abundance more of vexations they both received from her.
And that is the famous Devil's Book that only specters brought to the afflicted girls. John Putnam Jr. and George Herrick, the Marshal of Essex County, testified that they were at John Putnam Jr.'s house, and both saw Mercy Lewis in a very dreadful and solemn condition, so that, to their apprehension, she could not continue long in this world without a mitigation of those torments that they saw her in, which caused them to expedite a hasty dispatch to apprehend Mary Esty, in hopes, if possible, it might save Mercy's life.
They continued, returning the same night to said John Putnam's house about midnight, we found the said Mercy Lewis in a dreadful fit, but her reason was then returned again. She said, what have you brought me, the winding sheet, goodwife Esty? Well, I had rather go into the winding sheet than set my hand to that book.
But after that, the men said, her fits were weaker and weaker, but still complaining she was very sick in her stomach. About break of day, she fell asleep, but still continued extremely sick and was taken with a dread fit. Just as they left her, they could see she was barely alive.
So Mercy got very sick. The marshal rode from Salem town to John Putnam Jr.'s house in Salem Village to see Mercy, and then he rode to Topsfield to arrest Mary Esty, somehow got Mary to the Salem town jail, and rode back to the Putnam place in Salem Village by midnight.
After all this, Mercy was still sick.
So remember that there was this flicker of doubt shown during the examination of Mary Esty. She had been released because there was that doubt. But 2 days later, she's rearrested because an accuser had another fit. And that was enough.
That was enough. She was tried and condemned on September 9th, 1692. And she was executed by hanging on September 22nd, 1692, alongside 7 other innocent individuals. Salem minister Nicholas Noyes called them 8 firebrands of hell.
We do not know exactly where Mary is buried. There's no gravesite to visit.
But we have her own words, because before she died, she wrote a petition to the court, and this is the legal document she is remembered for. And she wrote it not just for herself. She knew she was going to die. She wrote it for the others, the ones who were still alive and still accused.
She wrote this, by the way, after she had already been convicted and condemned to die. So she knew it was going to happen. And just what she says here is so touching. I hope you'll read some of it for us.
The words of Mary: I petition to your honors, not for my own life, for I know I must die, and my appointed time is set. But the Lord, he knows it is, that if it be possible, no more innocent blood may be shed, which undoubtedly cannot be avoided in the way and course you go in.
She was asking the court to stop the killings, knowing she could not stop her own, which she met with dignity and grace. According to Robert Califf's well-known contemporary account, More Wonders of the Invisible World, Mary Esty, sister also to Rebecca Nurse, when she took her last farewell of her husband, children, and friends, was, as is reported by them present, as serious, religious, distinct, and affectionate as could well be expressed, drawing tears from the eyes of almost all present.
I wish she'd been a little more ruder. I always think that. I wish.
She was pushed just that little bit, but she should have just been straight, up in their faces.
Now, listen to a scene from her real afterlife that also outshines the Conjuring storytelling. After her death, a woman named Mary Herrick gave testimony to the court. She said the ghost of Mary Esty had come to her and told her she had been put to death wrongfully and was innocent, and that she had come to vindicate her cause.
So even in the folklore surrounding Mary's death, she came back to say she was innocent. not to terrorize innocent people through the worship of the devil.
That is Mary Towne Easty. That is who this film named as the grandmother of a satanic lineage.
A woman who was released and then taken in the middle of the night, who wrote her final petition for others, who told the court she had never known the least thing of witchcraft.
That woman, who said she prayed against Satan all her days, spent her final words trying to save other people.
Mary's innocence and our true connection to her is why you are listening to this show today.
Mary Esty is one of the innocent voices behind this podcast and the nonprofit organization End Witch Hunts, which works to clear the record for the historical witch trials and for those suffering today, because the same witchcraft accusations that ruined Mary's life are ruining lives now. Not just metaphorical witch hunts, not just in other forms, in the same form, actual witch hunts.
We're both direct descendants of Mary Towne Easty, and this is a descendant-led advocacy. That is what End Witch Hunts is built on. The people doing this work are connected by blood to the people whose names we are fighting to restore.
When the screenwriters put Mary Esty's name in the Conjuring script, they were not just being careless with a historical footnote. They were putting the name of our ancestor into the mouth of a horror franchise, the most successful horror franchise, and telling the global audience she was the origin of a satanic lineage. That lands differently when you are a descendant, doesn't it?
But there's no legal recourse because Mary Esty is dead. She's been dead for quite some time. But there's a legal case that's worth knowing about here. In 2021, a Georgian chess champion named Nona Gaprindashvili sued Netflix over a single line of dialogue in The Queen's Gambit that falsely stated she had never faced men at chess. Netflix argued the show was fiction and therefore immune.
A federal judge rejected that. The judge wrote that a fictional work does not insulate a studio from defamation claims if a real person is named and a false statement is framed as historical fact. Netflix settled.
So a living woman got justice over one false line in a chess drama.
Mary Esty gets nothing because U.S. defamation law does not extend past death in any state. That is the specific protection that fails her. Not copyright, not right of publicity, defamation. The law that would have applied here simply does not reach the dead.
And that gap is not an accident of oversight. It's a reflection of something that runs much deeper in this culture. The people who testified falsely against Mary Esty in 1692 were rewarded. The accusations kept the court functioning. The court kept the colony functioning. Lying about her served a purpose, and the system was built to accommodate it.
And 300 years later, the system still accommodates it, just with a different currency. The Conjuring grossed millions of dollars in its opening run. The franchise is worth billions of dollars. There are rewards built into the fabric of this culture for telling a compelling false story about a woman who cannot defend herself. Colonial courts ran on it. Hollywood runs on it. The mechanisms are different. The result for Mary Esty and other women is the same.
Yeah, I was just realizing that those ghost shows that claim to talk to Mary Esty and Bridget Bishop, they're doing the same thing here because they're deceased. They can make up stories, call them legends, and it passes, and it makes compelling entertainment.
And, descendants want to know Mary. So when it's presented like that, it's compelling. But it's not coming from Mary or Bridget Bishop or any of them.
Definitely not. Let's take a look at what the real accusations said. What were they claiming that Mary Esty did? In 1692, Mary is accused of using her specter to violently attack and threaten the lives of the afflicted girls, specifically Mercy Lewis and Elizabeth Hubbard.
During severe episodes of alternating fits, witnesses claimed that Mary's specter was choking the girls and subjecting them to breathless fits. The afflicted girls also reported that Mary's specter was strangling Mercy Lewis with chains. This sounds like it's right out of a horror movie.
It's terrible. It's a ghostly apparition coming with like chains that you can actually feel. And in the case of one of the afflicted girls, Ann Putnam Jr., she showed chain marks on her arm at one point, like real chain marks that could be felt and seen. In this story, Esty's specter allegedly tried to force Mercy to sign the devil's book, threatening her with a winding sheet, a burial shroud, and a coffin if she refused. The attacks were perceived to be so severe that Mercy Lewis believed Esty's specter would successfully murder her before midnight, which prompted terrified locals to wake the magistrates in the middle of the night. Imagine this is that late night police showing up at the judge's house to say, we've got to go do something about this. And they get up, they issue the warrant, they send the constable back, go get her.
That's not a screenplay. That's the actual historic record. Beat that Sing Conjuring franchise. But it gets better. Instead of enraged demonic havoc, Mary writes that legal petition that we read to you, and you can go online and read today.
She made several powerful declarations and practical recommendations to the authorities.
She firmly maintained her innocence, and she declared that she knew not the least thing of witchcraft. And she wasn't going to give a false confession. There was no reason. She said, I dare not belie my own soul.
She explicitly called out the court's errors, pointing to her own wrongful conviction as undeniable proof. She boldly told the magistrates, by my own innocency, I know you are in the wrong way. She warned them that if they continued on their current path, the deaths of more innocent people undoubtedly cannot be avoided.
She also offered strategic advice to expose the fraud. To uncover the truth, she suggested in this petition that the judges strictly examine the afflicted accusers and keep them separated from one another.
Which now is general practice by police departments. They don't interview people together so they can't collaborate on the story that they're telling. You get them separated and they can't affect each other's afflictions in this case.
That was
They
Mary
can't.
Esty's idea.
It's Mary Esty. She's thinking of this, and now it's standard operating procedure. But she urged the court to scrutinize the confessors as well, as he recommended putting the confessing witches on trial, expressing her absolute confidence that several of them had belied themselves and others by fabricating tales of the devil just so that they could survive the intense interrogations.
Fabricating tales of the devil. What a common motif. Ultimately, Mary Esty's petition demonstrated her profound empathy and strength. Rather than focusing solely on her own impending execution, she was looking beyond herself to stop a devastating miscarriage of justice from destroying the rest of her community. And this really shows this wasn't hysterics going on. It was like moving through an orderly court, and she's like saying, let's do it a better way.
Yeah. She it's just so moving, her petition. Every time I encounter that, I feel so moved that she knows that she's going to die no matter what she says. They're going to get her. And she still has that courage to write to them and say, do this for all the other people. It's the complete opposite of a legacy of cursing farmland. It's a smart and beautiful legacy. Now we want to pull back here and look at something bigger. Because when you trace the full arc of this story from 1692 to today, there's a thread that runs through all of it. And that thread is the devil pact accusation.
We need to be clear that the devil pact as a concept has a long and genuinely complex history across many traditions. The idea that a person might make a bargain with the dark force in exchange for power or knowledge, that story appears across cultures and centuries.
In the legal history of witch trials, that story became a weapon.
In 1692, Mary Esty was accused of making a pact with the devil. That's how she was harming Mercy. The accusation was treated as legal evidence in a court of law. She was executed for it. The Devil Pact was a prosecutorial tool.
In 1981, a real man named Arnie Cheyenne Johnson stabbed someone to death in Brookfield, Connecticut. His defense was that he had been demonically possessed, not guilty by reason of demonic possession. The real Ed and Lorraine Warren testified on his behalf. The Devil Pact became a modern defense strategy.
Gerald Brittle published The Devil in Connecticut in 1983. The Warrens were front and center. This book later generated lawsuits from the case, and those lawsuits were alleging that the possession narrative was fabricated and it exploited vulnerabilities for profit.
In 2013, The Conjuring names Mary Esty as the origin of a satanic lineage. The Devil Pact becomes an entertainment product sold globally, worth well over $2 billion.
There is another lawsuit that's important to know. Gerald Brittle also published a book in 1980 called The Demonologist. It was a biography of the Warrens, written with their cooperation. He later sued Warner Brothers for nearly $900 million, claiming the Conjuring films infringed on his exclusive rights to the Warren case files.
And he made a fascinating legal argument. He said the Warren stories could not be claimed as historical facts because they were fabricated, and therefore they were subject to copyright as fiction. The case settled out of court in 2017. Allegedly, a film producer had been funding and controlling Brittle's litigation from behind the scenes.
And threading through all of it, from The Conjuring to Salem, is another legend, a legendary doll, a Raggedy Ann doll named Annabelle.
This franchise has a mascot, and she has her own story.
The real Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll. Yarn hair, stitched smile, she sits in a glass case with a warning sign that reads, "Positively do not touch."
The film version is a cracked porcelain Victorian doll designed to make you sleep with the lights on. Hollywood made that choice deliberately to frighten you. They could not use the Raggedy Ann likeness, and frankly, a cheerful ragdoll was not going to carry this mega blockbuster horror franchise.
Annabelle is introduced in The Conjuring. The Warrens use her in the opening sequence to explain the difference between a haunted vessel and a demonic possession. She's the teaching tool, the case study, and then she gets her own franchise.
Spin-off films. No connection to the parent case, no connection to Bathsheba Sherman, and no connection to Mary Towne Easty.
Until now, because Annabelle is headed to Salem.
Back to the place where Mary Esty was killed. In August 2025, the Warren House in Monroe, Connecticut, where the occult museum holding their career artifacts is located, was purchased by a young comedian named Matt Rife.
A controversial comedian, you can Google that.
A comedian who is now the legal guardian of the Annabelle doll under a 5-year arrangement with Tony Spera, the Warren son-in-law. Rife has announced overnight stays and museum tours.
So the doll that has no connection to the parent case, no connection to Mary Towne Easty, no connection to Bathsheba Sherman, is now in the custody of a comedian who bought the haunted house because he loves the Conjuring films.
And then in March 2026, the Salem City Council received an application from an entity called Haunted Warren Museum, LLC, proposing to operate the Haunted Warren Museum at 259 Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts. A lot of you might know Essex Street. The museum will be filled with exhibit spaces with paranormal artifacts from around the world, including, of course, the Annabelle doll.
259 Essex Street, Salem, the same street the actual Mary Esty walked.
A Salem city councilor named Ty Hapworth recently posted publicly about it. He was direct. The city pushed back on the requested operating hours and granted more reasonable ones for the neighborhood. But he was clear that arguments about Salem's identity and culture are arguments about taste, and taste alone is not a lawful basis for government to block a business altogether. The Constitution does not give government that power.
Salem built its entire tourism economy on the fear and the spectacle. This museum is not a departure, it's a continuation. Salem took the worst chapter in its history and turned it into a cottage industry. This is where the road leads. And it circles back to where this episode started. The fear of the devil drove the trials. The fear of the devil is now walking through the door at 259 Essex Street in a glass case.
Real history and real film reel history.
This is the city where Mary Towne Easty was executed in 1692, and now a museum built around a franchise that named her as the origin of a satanic lineage is setting up in the place of her death.
I want to just sit with that for a second. The accusation that killed her in 1692, that she was in league with the devil, is now the premise of a paranormal museum seeking a business license from the city of Salem. And modern Salem isn't sure it wants it or is ready for it.
Salem has been grappling with this tension for centuries between honoring the history of the witch trials and profiting from the mythology around them. This is a particularly pointed version of that tension because this specific franchise defamed a specific victim and now it wants a storefront in her city. And now in 2026, the Devil Pack becomes a tourist attraction.
The mechanism never went away, it just changed form. And Mary Esty's name is threaded through all of it because her accusers in 1692 and the screenwriters in 2013 were doing the same thing, attaching a real person's name to a demonic narrative to make it feel true.
While there is something worth honoring in the tradition the franchise is drawing from, the haunted house, the possession, the fear that evil could attach itself to a place and wait, these are stories that go back thousands of years across cultures. They are speaking to a real fear in the human experience, even when the specific details are invented and frankly insulting.
The demon in The Conjuring is doing what demons in stories have always done. It is giving shape to the fear that we might lose ourselves, that we might harm the people we love without wanting to, that the past might reach forward into the present and claim us. That is not trivial.
But the real people underneath that story deserve to be seen clearly. So here's how we suggest carrying them.
When the film mentions Mary Towne Easty, hear it as what it is, a screenwriter's invention, and then replace it with who she actually was, a woman who stood in a courtroom in 1692 and said she never complied with Satan but prayed against him all her days, who spent her last words trying to save others. That is Mary Esty.
When you see the horrific depiction of Bathsheba Sherman on screen, remember that a real woman by that name is buried in a cemetery in Rhode Island. She was an ordinary woman who died of a stroke. Her grave has been vandalized because of this film. She deserves better.
Oh, by the way, when you see the hanging scene, know that the hanging detail comes from the tragic death of a real woman named Susan Richardson Arnold, who died in 1866 at 50 years old in her own home, miles from the parent farmhouse. Not on that property, not connected to Bathsheba or Satan. Another real woman with a real story that the film stripped of its actual circumstances.
And when you see the parent family, know the real family is more complicated and more interesting than the film has room for.
Watch the film, enjoy the film. It's really entertaining. And carry these people with you.
This episode is part of an ongoing project to document the ways real people are caught up in witchcraft accusations in history and in the present.
We're working on legislation in Massachusetts to formally exonerate the victims of the pre-Salem Boston witch trials. You can find more information at change.org/witch trials and sign the petition.
And for more on the Salem witch trials, check out our podcast, Salem Witch Trials Daily, and The Thing About the Salem Witch Trials.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.